The first thing he saw was light. Not the harsh, sterile light of a hospital room, but a soft, gentle glow that seemed to come from everywhere at once. For weeks there had been nothing, just a deep, endless darkness, a silence that was so complete it was louder than any noise. But now there was a flicker, a single, tiny spark in the vast emptiness. Was he dreaming? Was this the end? Or was it, against all odds, a new beginning? He didn't know it yet, but the world was holding its breath, waiting for him to open his eyes. His eyelids fluttered. It was a small movement, almost nothing. A nurse walking by might have missed it entirely. But his wife, Sarah, saw it. She had been sitting by his bedside for 34 days straight. She had memorized every line on his face, every rise and fall of his chest. Just 5 weeks earlier, Mark was a man full of life. He was a father of 2, a loving husband, and a respected high school history teacher. His days were filled with the ordinary, beautiful rhythm of a happy life. The day of the accident started like any other Tuesday. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and Mark was driving home from a parent-teacher conference. He was thinking about what to make for dinner, humming along to the radio. A truck, coming from the opposite direction, suddenly swerved into his lane. There was no time to react. The sound of screeching tires and shattering glass was the last thing he remembered before the world went black. The scene was chaotic. Paramedics worked frantically to free him from the twisted metal wreckage of his car. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow. The head injury was severe. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous cycle of beeps, hushed conversations, and waiting. The hospital room became the family's new home. Sarah rarely left his side, sleeping in the uncomfortable recliner chair next to his bed. His children, Emily and Josh, were confused and scared. Josh, who was only 8, would tell his dad about his soccer games, his voice small and hopeful. They brought in drawings and cards from school, taping them to the walls until the sterile room was covered in a collage of love and hope. The doctors made their rounds every morning. They would check his pupils with a small flashlight, test his reflexes, and review the charts. Their faces were often professional and somber, their language clinical and detached. While his family kept watch in the quiet hospital room, Mark was somewhere else entirely. He was not in a state of nothingness, as the doctors assumed. He was, in his own words, more awake than he had ever been in his life. He found himself in a place that was both strange and incredibly familiar. He described seeing a landscape that was impossible to put into words. The colors were more vibrant than anything he had ever seen on Earth. There were fields of grass that shimmered with a light of their own, and flowers that bloomed in hues that he had no names for. The sky was not blue, but a swirling tapestry of soft gold, pink, and violet. He was not alone in this place. He saw figures in the distance, bathed in a soft, white light. He couldn't make out their faces clearly, but he felt an overwhelming sense of love and recognition. He saw his grandmother, who had passed away when he was a boy. So, Mark could hear things from the world he had left behind, but honestly, not in the way we normally hear. The sounds, they came to him as distant echoes, almost like listening to a conversation through a thick wall. He heard the monotonous beep of the machines, that steady rhythm, and somehow, it anchored him. But more clearly, he heard the voices of his family. He heard Sarah reading to him. Her voice was just a soothing balm to his spirit. He could actually feel the love and the worry in her words, like a wave of emotion that just washed over him in his peaceful state. He heard his children too. He heard Josh's excited chatter about his soccer goal, and it brought this feeling of warmth and light to him. One of the most vivid things he remembered was the feeling of his wife's hand in his. He couldn't feel the physical touch, the pressure of her skin on his, but instead, he felt her energy. It was such a powerful connection, a real lifeline that kept him tethered to his earthly existence. The most profound part of his experience was the light. It wasn't just something he saw, it was something he felt, He described it as a living entity, a being made of pure, unconditional love. It was brighter than the sun, yet he could look directly at it without any discomfort at all. As he drew closer to it, the feelings of peace and love just intensified until they were almost overwhelming. Within this light, he relived his entire life. It wasn't a judgment, it was a life review, but from a different perspective. He saw every moment, from his childhood to the accident, not just through his own eyes, but through the eyes of every person he had ever interacted with. He saw how every small act of kindness had rippled outwards, and how every harsh word had left a mark. He felt a communication from this being of light, not in words, but in pure thought and feeling. He was shown glimpses of his children's futures, of moments he was meant to be a part of, graduations, weddings, the birth of his grandchildren. He was given a choice. He could stay in this place of perfect peace and love, or he could go back to the pain and struggle of his broken body. But the thought of his family, of Sarah's unwavering love, of the future moments he would miss with his children, was a powerful pull. He chose them. He chose life. He chose to return. As soon as he made the choice, he felt himself being pulled back, away from the light, back towards the distant echoes of the hospital room. The journey back was not as gentle as the journey out. It was a jarring, confusing descent from a world of clarity and peace into a world of pain and confusion. The first sensation was heaviness. His body felt like it was made of lead. The peaceful silence was replaced by a cacophony of sounds, the relentless beeping of the monitor, the hum of equipment, the muffled voices of nurses. He tried to move, but his limbs wouldn't obey his commands. He was trapped. But then, he felt it again. The gentle pressure of Sarah's hand holding his, that connection, that anchor of love was the one thing that was real in both worlds. He focused all his energy, all his will on one simple task, opening his eyes. He strained and a flicker of movement happened. His eyelids trembled. He heard Sarah's gasp, her voice calling his name, filled with a desperate hope that gave him more strength. And then, slowly, his eyes opened. The light was bright and painful. The room was blurry, a swirl of shapes and colors. But then, a face came into focus. It was Sarah. Her eyes were wide, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling, the most beautiful smile he had ever seen. A few days later, the breathing tube was removed. Mark's first words were hoarse and weak, but they were clear. "I saw Grandma," he whispered to Sarah. At first, she thought he was confused, but as he grew stronger, he began to tell her more. He spoke of the fields of light, the music, the feeling of unconditional love. When he shared his story with his doctors, they were polite but skeptical. "How do you explain this?" he asked one of the neurologists. He proceeded to describe a specific conversation the doctor had with a nurse. He repeated their words verbatim, describing what they were wearing and the coffee mug the doctor was holding. The doctor's face went pale. He remembered the conversation perfectly. There was no possible way Mark could have heard or seen it. Mark's story began to spread through the hospital. Nurses would stop by his room, not just for medical checks, but to hear him talk. His story was filled with hope, peace, and a profound sense of purpose. He simply shared what he had seen and felt, with a quiet humility that was deeply moving. He was living proof of something more, something beyond what their medical textbooks could explain. He had seen the other side, and he had returned with a message of love. So what do we make of a story like Mark's? Is it simply the last dream of a dying brain? Science would tell us that's the most likely explanation. Our brains are complex machines, and when the machine is broken, it can produce all sorts of strange and unpredictable results. But what about the things that science can't explain? How do we account for the thousands of similar stories from people all over the world? Are they all having the same hallucination? Or are they all tapping into the same universal truth? Mark's story forces us to ask some of the biggest questions we can ask. What happens when we die? Does our consciousness survive the death of our physical body? Ultimately, what Mark brought back is a message of hope. His story suggests that death may not be an end, but a transition. It suggests that the universe is not a cold, random place, but one that is held together by an all-encompassing love. It tells us that our lives have meaning, that our connections to each other matter, and that love is the most powerful force of all. Whether you believe his experience was real or a dream, its impact is undeniable. It inspires us to live more fully, to love more deeply, and to look at the world and what may lie beyond it with a sense of wonder and hope.